Excellent. Thanks for that. Yeah, so I think a quick setup for the context would be, we had in the last day of the meeting in Austin, we had a session on projects that would support eMERGE going forward. How are we gonna, what will we need to do or be doing in order for eMERGE to kind of go into its next era or its next form of organization? And there were several things that were discussed in that meeting. A lot of the conversation, as I recall, it was people saying we wanted to pull together some, the people who are gathering, who are interested in these topics, the people who understand and see that we are in a meta crisis, who are organizing in various ways to do something about that. I remember that theme coming up again about we wanted to be working in the realm of thinking, in the realm of being, in the realm of doing. And as this community is starting to come together, should we have sort of a loose affiliation? Should we let it come up naturally without much organization? Should there be more or less organization? Lots of people were talking about networks and DAOs and things like that. And I remember at one point I chimed in, and I was a little bit disturbed about the idea of a DAO as a network of people that somehow make decisions through computer algorithms. And I think Brad and some of the people he was talking to said, no, I think you don't yet know what's available in that space. And we had a side conversation, and that for me was kind of an incubator for the NAO idea, now eMERGE or eMERGE now, which Brad and team have been working on for ever since the conference. So I think just the rough outline of this conversation will be, why now? That's a timing question. Why is this idea appropriate for where we're at in the evolution of eMERGE and the larger conversations in which eMERGE is a part of? And then what is now? What is it and how does it work? And then we'd like to have just an open conversation about, especially hearing from the eMERGE group about where are you at in your thinking? What do you think is next? How does the network idea, or the idea of pulling together this larger group of people into a coherent, useful resource, how does that fit your thinking? And then see if we can together come up with a set of next steps, or are we going to work together? Will we work independently? What makes sense for us at this period of time? Does that seem like the conversation that you were expecting?
I think that sounds super. And if I could please use a minute also to give a little bit of framing, particularly for you who were not in Austin. So Daniel Schmachtenberger introduced me to Brad, and Brad and I had a few video calls before Austin, and Brad already started before Austin to, in a very clever way, using data on LinkedIn, map the greater network, just using Daniel and myself as a starting point. And when you showed me, Brad, in Austin, what you had done there, and the reach of just the network of the two of us, if we could do this with 10 people or 50 people, or with all the people that was at the eMERGE gathering in Austin and the previous one in Berlin, we would be reaching a sizable number of people who would potentially be very interested in engaging in the network and in these ideas. So I think just just between Daniel and myself, was it 20,000 or was it 200,000?
It was 25,000 just from you, and then beyond, once we started going beyond you. It's up to 233,000 now.
It got much bigger.
To 200,000 now, yeah. And with the graphics you had, one could get a graphical picture of how these networks overlap and who is there and whatever. And I just got very enthusiastic about the possibility of using these sort of technology to reach out to people and spread this message and get more people engaged. So I think you and your team did a lot of work just leading up to Emerge, and if you have now continued to do work after Emerge on this network mapping and potentially other things, I think that is fantastic.
One other component that we had in the app that we did for Austin that really didn't get any exposure because we weren't really ready to tell everyone about it. So it was there mainly to kind of show to you, Thomas, and to other people, and Ivo. Jonathan, I don't think I didn't meet you there, and I want to make sure that you've seen everything that's there. But one of the other component besides the network is the inquiries, which is essentially our decision, a simple decision-making system where people can kind of ask a question and anyone can propose answers and vote on those answers and kind of quickly bubble up consensus or alignment. And we found that to be really interesting. So those were the main two components.
Yeah, I think that was the initial insight I had as well, Thomas. After my objection to the idea of a DAO in the meeting, once Brad and a couple of guys took me aside, showed me the display so that I could see the network, it became visible to me. That in itself was a revelation. But then as we got into it, what I realized is that the network itself can be enriched and therefore able to become a sense-making network or a sense-making forum, a way to make collaborative decisions, a way to coordinate action. So it becomes a lot more interesting to me in that sense, in terms of moving an organism forward and actually coordinating. So I don't want to steal Brad's thunder at all. So I think that's a good setup for Brad to kind of take us through the various elements of the NAO and what's possible there, so that we can begin to see how it might fit with the next generation or the next iteration of the Emerge organism or entity or whatever it is we're calling it.
Great. And can you set me up to screen share?
I can. Just quickly, any questions before we launch?
We want to do a quick introduction, just so everybody give us 30 seconds on their background so that everyone knows who we're talking to.
Sure, why not? I'll start. I'm Rick Stricker. I'm in Austin, Texas. I've been a management consultant for the last 20 or 30 years, working in big organizations. And I'm shifting my gears right now to want to support the addressing the various elements of the meta crisis.
Not sure how everybody's organized. You guys know me and you'll hear more from me. So
Okay.
Nathan?
Yeah.
Oh.
Sure. Hi guys. I'm Nathan Snyder. I'm a recovering corporate organization design consultant, and think networks are much more important for our current challenges than organizations were in the past. And it just so happens that some of the same sort of organizations have the inverse problem that networks have. Networks need to organize, organizations need to become more networked. So this is a very apt conversation for me to be in. I also am an adult development researcher. I study cognitive and socio-emotional development of adults.
Thank you.
I'm
Uh,
June Ollie.
good.
I'm considered the grandmother of networks and network weaving, and wrote the Network Weaver Handbook. I've been working in this space for 40 years. And right now I'm writing a book called Transformation, Co-Creating a World That's Good for All of Us. Particularly interested in the self-organizing aspects, how networks can move to action, and loving working with Brad and the rest of the group on this, trying to add the pieces from my experience.
Thanks, June. How about
I
Charles?
could, I,
Oh,
Go ahead,
go ahead, Thomas.
okay, I can go next. So I'm Thomas Björkman. I'm a reformed investment banker. Founded the Oak Island Foundation, Ekskäret, in Sweden 12 years ago. Co-founder with Jonathan of Perspectiva, and the initiator of Emerge. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas.
Jonathan?
Hello there. So I'm Jonathan. I'm beaming in from London. I'm a recovering chess grandmaster, I suppose, since we're all recovering from something. That's my kind of USP. That's really what formed my character, and I wrote about that in a memoir recently. But for the last 15 odd years, I've been working in some kind of strange combination of public policy, applied philosophy, and a kind of spiritual practice get socialized kind of milieu of some kind. And the reason this conversation is curious is the very first report I wrote was actually something called Connected Communities. And its very premise was to use what was back then a relatively simple form of social network analysis to visualize communities of, well, sometimes geographic communities, sometimes communities of interest, sometimes communities of practice. But learning quite early on that there is this magic sauce of reflexivity baked into network visualization, such that to see the network is to change the network. For the person within the network to see the network is to change the person. And so I'm very much aware of the power of this kind of visual representation of what's going on, not just as a descriptive method, but as a generative and transformative one, although we have to take care to define these terms, of course. I'm now director of Perspectiva. My day job is, we have a publishing arm. We run something called the Anti-Debate Process. We have an annual festival called the Realization Festival. We're about to start doing some courses online. So that's a kind of mostly a sort of intellectual leadership function within Perspectiva. But a few years ago, after the Kiev gathering in 2019, Perspectiva took on primary responsibility for the Emerge network, including its website. And so for the last 3 years, give or take, I've been thinking a fair bit about, many different strategy documents written here and there about what Emerge is. And, I feel like I've done that many times over, what we should do next and why. And sadly, I couldn't make it to Austin, as some of you know, because I got COVID just at exactly that time. And but I mean, Emerge, as you know, has a history that precedes Austin, and I suppose that's quite important to us, that those coming to Emerge from Austin are also, when they're speaking with the Emerge cohort, are aware that we're seeing it as something more international and with its own history and its own kind of intellectual dignity, I hope, as well. Yeah, so that's the lie of the land at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Dounia.
Hello, my name is Dounia. I'm currently in Nova Scotia. I'm a recovering environmental and labor economist. And in the past 6 years, I've been surrendering to the network and to the ecosystem and system change, with a focus on the gift economy and local food systems. And in that journey, I've met Charles and started working with Brad now, and I'll be working in the realm of community and network weaving with ProSocial starting now, and that's kind of where I think enough for now, given the time. And perhaps I'll pass it to Ivo.
Thank you, Dounia. Yeah, I'm Ivo. I work for Perspectiva. All that Jonathan mentioned, I've had a hand in making that happen, realizing a bit more on the practical side of things so far. Also been involved with Emerge for quite a few years now, at least been to 3 gatherings. And yeah, what is relevant for this meeting is together with Nathan, we've been holding this question of like, what is next for Emerge in terms of its form, alongside when it's kind of gradually also coming into its own in the formulation of its purpose as a movement. And it was funny to see the whole, what do you call it, the mandala of the NAO, that each of those segments is kind of what we have been pursuing inquiries into DAOs, into the cooperatives, and then many more of the elements. So it was quite funny to see that we've kind of wound up here. Yeah, I think I'll just leave. Well, no, I'm also shifting the role into much more in the developing of the praxis wing, and I think it's quite important also to approach everything that seems strategic or seems to be like anything or seem manifest, is already taken as a practice in some sense. I feel quite strongly, more and more feel quite strongly about that actually. The longer we've been thinking about these things. So that's it. Charles, I think, is the final one, right? Over to you.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Just super glad to be here, and it's a pleasure to meet those of you I haven't met. Okay, so I'm also in recovery of collective intelligence exploration. And also global movement builder. But I think, the NAO is calling me back into service, maybe, yikes. But I've turned wisdom explorer, so and developing wisdom flow with Dounia and others for a while, particularly inspired by Tom Atlee and Douglas Engelbart, carrying forward from something called Kiko Lab, or Collective Intelligence Collaboratory, that ceased operation about a year ago, where I discovered that the collective intelligence is no good. It's really got to be about wisdom benefiting the whole, for at least 7 generations. Working with Brad this year has been a lot of like sparks flying, and just in time for Emerge and what you're seeing now and moving forward, the NAO I see as a meta pattern, really opportunity to make templates and in a fractal kind of way. The network co-op DAO potentially is a new legal structure. I think we'll touch on maybe and look at later. Moving into position to coordinate, initiate a handful of these SADI experiments. I'll just give a hint, that acronym for Brad, to touch on in sort of collective reflection and action with a number of different groups, significant groups. Certainly, hopefully with Emerge, and with Emerge likely potentially in the lead as far as being the first to kind of significantly form this kind of thing, take this approach. And lastly, the potential for building apps here is like kind of dizzying. So with that, over to you, Brad. Thanks.
All right, thanks everybody. So I assume everybody's looked at the deck, so I'm just going to do a little quick 5-minute kind of high level review of my thinking and try and put it into context, and then we can dive into discussion. Can I share, Rick? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. So do you guys know the term big, hairy, audacious goal? That's like, Amazon's big, hairy, audacious goal was every book ever printed in any language, all available in less than 60 seconds. So what is Emerge's big, hairy, audacious goal, and ours? Well, I'll take a stab at it. It's to envision a positive future, the third attractor, and to manifest it through emergence by design. So one metaphor for that came up at Austin a lot for me was this notion of superorganism. This is actually one of the inquiries we did in the app, and where people could suggest a name for this thing, the game bee third attractor, and superorganism kept coming up in a lot of contexts. So it's kind of a good metaphor from my perspective. We all kind of know what it is. So can we kind of intentionally manifest a superorganism that gets us to this positive future? And Thomas, I remember your initial opening presentation where you had those two extra dimensions, the holistic and the self-transcendence, going beyond where we are now. I sort of see this superorganism possibility as kind of hinting at that. When I think of beyond emerge, or what is emerge part of, I really think of, I've been using the regenerative movement as kind of the membrane of what's our, if we just keep expanding, how far does it go? And I just sort of think of the regenerative movement as kind of easily propagated to, and a necessary condition for that is new levels of connection. I'm going to skip over some of this, the sort of neural analogy. But anyway, so, we're all about making our connections more accessible and evolving how we use them. And we think it's kind of a necessary to reach where we want to go. This is the mandala that Ivo talked about. What we currently have is, kind of the social graph and the trust network part of it as bootstrapped. And that the point of talking now is like, are we interested in, we're interested in kind of formalizing the other three parts into something that actually has real impact. To talk about scale, this is sort of the way we're thinking. Thomas, you were asking about the sizes. So I did this just a brief thing here. I sort of think of Austin as part of emerge as part of the regenerative movement, and regenerative movement as part of humanity, obviously. So this is what it actually was 47,000, starting with Tomas. 155 of the Austin attendees gave us a penumbra of 47,000. And then since then, we've added another 1,005, and we're kind of up to 250,000 plus or minus. And so, we see this as just sort of an example of what's possible and how the emerge penumbra can grow fairly rapidly. So yeah, there's that. And I think that's, somebody mentioned apps. I just wanted, for one point of clarity, we don't think of NAO as being an app developer. It's more like a substrate of technology that's available to the commons. And the idea is to essentially empower developers that are aligned with this commons to add utility and create capabilities that we know are possible. A really classic example is there's a lot of discussion about innovation funds. How do we know there's a lot of dollars out there that want to go towards regenerative projects, but they don't know how to figure out where to put their money. I don't know if you know Katie Archambault's open impact application, but we're definitely in conversations where they need a user community, which is exactly what the NAO would be. Okay, so that's kind of leads us into further discussion. So I just have these points as ones that we might want to discuss. So we're initially curious as to how does this fit into Emerge's kind of near-term goals in general?
So Brad, before we go there, maybe just pause for a moment, and I'd like to make sure that we get clarification on some of the critical points that were in the deck and some that you didn't discuss. But for example, I had a question just now about the 250,000 people that are currently identified as part of the network that started from the initial profiles of Daniel and Tomas, expanded after the Austin event. out to 250,000, how would you characterize who those people are at this point?
Okay, so there's one class of people like Thomas and me and Dounia and June and Charles and you, Rick, and others, where we've essentially, each of us has taken our, let's say, 500 LinkedIn connections and identified 50 people that we think really represent the invention of the future that we want. They kind of add dimension to this network. So if you think of the network as being just Thomas at the beginning, then his 155 are the people who are in Austin. For me, I went through my LinkedIn connections, and I just identified people that I thought really represented this notion of inventing a positive future, and each of us did that. And so that's one level out. So each of those is a total of 1,005 among all of us now, 155 for Thomas originally. And then from there, each of them has 500 or so connections. So it's kind of, 2 degrees of separation from 10 of us, let's say. Is that clear?
Right. So the implication there would be that the people that are identified in that network would at least know something about the common ideas or shared understandings of what's happening in the world. I mean, there are going to be people who are connected to the integral movement, to the regenerative movement, perhaps to metamodernism. So that's the kind of the basic data set. But then say a little bit more about how that group of people becomes a trust network. What do you mean by trust network?
Okay, so, we're using LinkedIn connections as a proxy for trust. And it's not a great proxy because it's one bit. I mean, there are people I'm connected to on LinkedIn that, I don't even remember why I'm connected to them. But it does help us kind of, especially in aggregate. And that's what gets really interesting, because when we bring in all of my connections and all of, June identifies 20 people, Dounia identifies 20 other people, and they bring in new connections that are, often dimensions that are way different from mine. You start to get interconnections between all these people, and that identifies the people, the kind of long tail of who's highly aligned with the existing network by virtue of as how much they're connected in. So George Poor, for instance, shows up as one of those people who's very connected to practically everyone that we crawled. Jonathan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just, forgive me, I didn't see the deck, so I'm trying to catch up with my understanding of what a NAO is.
Okay.
I have spoken to Ivo about this to some extent, and I did hear what you just said. But if someone were to test me, my life depended on it, I'm not sure I'd be alive tomorrow. So I'm just as I think it was Denzel Washington in the film Philadelphia, explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
Okay, so I think the mandala, as Ivo called it, is probably the simplest way to look at it. Right. So what we built in this crawl is a social graph, right? It's Thomas and the attendees, all the attendees connections in LinkedIn. So that's nodes and edges, right? And then if you sorry, oh shoot, there it is. If you let these connections kind of stand in for trust, then you could call that a trust network. One of the steps that's necessary here is for each of us to kind of prune those connections and say, I really trust these people in these domains. That's one of the areas where there's a lot of both opportunity and need, is to kind of capture what's in our brains about who we really do trust in what domains, because right now that information in what we have now is very, very limited. It's just one bit. So those are the two things that we have in place right now, Jonathan, is this kind of social graph, a bootstrap social graph with
Right.
with an implication of trust among the members. Now, the idea is that that shouldn't be owned by anyone. It needs to be, a decentralized owned. It needs to be cooperatively owned and governed. That's the core idea, is that that social graph has value, especially as it grows, and that the participants need to own it. And that's where the platform co-op comes in. So in essence, that platform co-op is really just an incorporated cooperative that, whose shared resource is a software-based, data-based resource.
Okay,
So
I think, right. So I think I'm beginning to get the picture. So someone, when I was struggling to understand DAOs back in the day, someone said the quickest way to understand a DAO is that it's a network with their own bank account. Basically, it's a shared, it's a group of people with their own bank account. It was a very simple and misses a lot. I get it, but when I'm looking at this, a NAO would be a network with its own image of itself in a sociograph, its own sense of itself in a sociograph, including all the resources and capacities that contains, which allows you to, in effect, trade time and resources based on that resource, which has to be shared by everyone, which is, and it therefore it sort of exemplifies principles of the commons. And
yes.
It's grounded in trust rather than regulation, because it arises from proxies for measurements of trust. And that's something like the core elements. So you're saying here in this image here, you have 5 different elements that comprise a NAO.
Yeah, I'm trying to make this a little bit bigger. Actually, I'll go back to the other one because we don't need that extra confusion. So the 5, yes. So point of clarity, it is a commons, right? And the commons actually is the users. So it's actually a really interesting, unique commons in the sense that the shared resource is the users, right?
Yes,
Whereas,
yes, no, yeah. Which is how it always should have been somehow, right? So I understand that's fundamental, and that's also the asset of the NAO and its primary contribution, and it takes it very seriously. It's not an aside, it's not a pretty picture, it's the very heart of the matter. And that's what makes the NAO. It's a sociograph, which is a big thing. It's the trust network. I'm struggling to get my head around, because at the moment, all you've got are proxy measures based on social network connections. Is there anything more meaningful about trust that a NAO exemplifies?
Yeah. So there's liquid democracy is the key answer to that, because it's not just about the network. It's that these networks have this embedded capacity to make collective decisions that you can't make without these edges, right? You can use the edges for delegation, right, for proxy. And you can do network analytics that say these people are more authoritative than others in this domain of expertise,
right,
based on their connectivity within that space. So that's a big part of the opportunity, is to kind of really empower ourselves with, getting really good at liquid democracy that's enabled by being a network.
Okay, but for example, if you're using a retweet as a trust measure, as I saw somewhere, how is that validity being checked? Is that sort of now quite grounded analytically, or?
I would say more intuitively, that you can, if you look at these networks and you can see who's highly, highly connected, it makes sense. I mean, in a lot of the main limitation at this point is that there are kind of what I call LinkedIn whores, people who just connect to connect, right? And so they end up being connected to a lot of people, but and that's where
refinement, sure.
And I think one of the big opportunities and needs, if we go forward with this, is how do we make it fun and easy for you to kind of garden your neighborhood, right? So that your immediate network actually represents who you do trust and in what domains.
No, I like
sorry, I think that it's important to stress that what we have done so far is just using existing social networks to get sort of an understanding of what this looks like. If you would implement this on a platform, then you could ask people to explicitly sort of name those ones in the network that are trusted connections and build on that.
This is why I like using the term enriched when we talk about a NAO, because the enrichment process is about building the trust networks in ways that actually help me and us make better decision, make better sense of what's going on. So that the initial social graph is pretty flat with some inferences of trust, but I think as the trust part of the network grows, that's what really makes the value of NAO go up. I mean, value is partially to do with the size of the network, but really I think it has more to do with the robustness of the trust relationships.
Right.
Understand.
And what about how does trust go the opposite way? How is reputation decreased as a result of bad actors?
You can withdraw your proxy to people that you have given proxy to if you find that they're not making good decisions. So it can be kind of amped up or amped down to dynamically.
Also, because it's by invitation, there is a chain of accountability for every participant, so that you can say this participant was invited by this, so it's a chain back to the originators. So you can actually say this chain is accountable, or that person is accountable to this chain.
I know Charles is trying to get in here, so let's
Just
he's politely raising his hand.
Oh yeah, well, I can try. So yeah, to underscore what I put in the chat, this is bootstrapping mode, and it's early days, but it's still significant and substantial. But the edges sort of find a resolution on. We'll be refining moving forward as we build, expand, and there'll be better and more satisfying answers to these questions. Quite soon, and then increasingly. I don't know, Brad, if you already planned, or if there's time, like for literally 2 minutes for the demo screen share. Just some of us haven't seen, and some of us would like to maybe see the updates. Just because I think it'll be actually efficient way to illustrate what's actually going on and what's planned.
Okay.
But back to you.
Yeah. And Jonathan, you asked a question in the chat about what we mean by new levels of connection. Primarily, it is that the connections you see in these networks are really one bit. It says I'm connected to you and you're connected to me in LinkedIn, and there's no, it's not even it's not even 2 bits, right? Where you can connect to me without me connecting to you. So that's very low fidelity. And so when I talk about new levels, it's like, I want to know, I really trust this person in finance, and this person in permaculture, and this person in whatever. So that's the kind of thing that when what Thomas was saying, and we were just riffing on a minute ago about really curating, enriching this network with what's in our heads, so that it becomes accessible to the commons. Yeah, so just real quick, I'll just do the quick tour of the app here.
Nathan, did you want to jump in? Is this something quick? Or?
Yeah, go for it, Nathan.
No, it's not quick.
Okay.
Okay, no worries.
Hold off a second.
All right, so yeah, so this is so you can see there's a lot of Tomases in here, right? So there's a lot of people in there. So
if you would have put in an H in the name, that would have been even more.
Yeah, exactly. And so and for a long time, I was confusing you with Thomas Bjorkholm. I kept saying, why is this data not showing up correctly? And so this is Tomas. Okay, now one of the recent changes is that the yellow are the people that we've actually gone to the next degree out. So anybody who's not yellow is a connection to one or more of the people we've crawled, but we haven't crawled them. Okay. So all these people that are yellow are people who are either 1 degree of separation from one of the 10 of us. And so and there's George.
We saw
Highly
George.
connected. So yeah, and then, and what we currently have
And you might,
is, psychedelic.
you who participated in Berlin, you will remember George from Emerge Gathering in Berlin in October.
So we can also, another area of enrichment that's really huge is that right now all we have is the title, the person's title and their location for searching against. So I just searched for psychedelic, and so these are like some of the many people who, not sure, there we go, sorry. So this is, a fairly highly connected sub-community of people who are, just have psychedelics in their job, in their title. And, we can make subgroups and sub-networks and all that. So that's actually, one other, that doesn't show on that version, but if we go to, so here's a bunch of groups that we just built from like the Collaborative Technology Alliance, which is, there was quite a bit of overlap in Austin. Tibet Sprague was there. There's quite a bit of people in that group. And so you can just sort of create sub-networks quickly. We're going to, so one of the things we want to do is pick domains of expertise that we want to focus on, and then start inviting people that we think are really good exemplars in that space. Real quick, on the inquiries part, these are the inquiries we did for Emerge. This is the one I showed you earlier, where anybody can suggest a new name. You just kind of put it in here and people can vote on it. It's ranked choice voting. I found this really interesting. If Emerge were a political party, one of the things we thought about changing this to, not if it were a political party, but if you were going to describe this positive future to lay people, what are the components of this positive future? And this isn't exactly it, but you could see that a lot of the same things about what do we represent as a community in terms of our vision. This would be a very interesting way to kind of crowdsource a platform, if you will. And then the bookmarking part of it is, this is kind of a social bookmarking system that we can talk about that, but basically this is low-hanging fruit for Emerge, is really just everybody to share a bookmark that when they come across something that they think the Emerge community or any subnetwork of the NAO might be interested in, they just share it, and then you can kind of have so for instance, these are Charles and I and a few other people are the main ones who've been using it, but I can search for DAOs, and I can search by time, or I can I think rewilding maybe, biodiversity, whatever.
So Brad, why don't we stop there? I'm just noticing that we have 10 minutes left in the time that we allotted. Does everybody need to stop right on the hour? Or does anybody not need to stop right on the hour?
I can give 10 more minutes at the end of the hour.
I can certainly continue.
Okay,
same.
Let's pause there with the presentation. I just would like to get a little bit of feedback or input from especially the Emerge group. Just what are your impressions so far? This is not a complete presentation, but you're getting the outlines of it. Where are you at in your process? How does this idea fit? Just anything that would help us kind of make sense together of our collective sense making on the topic.
So Tomas, Ivo, who wants to go first?
I could go with just a few first comments. So irrespective of what we are doing with Emerge as an organization going forward, using this type of technology to be able to expand our network and expand our reach of ideas and all of that, I think that is a no-brainer. I mean, using this technology in some way, we should do. This is a good use of social networking technology compared to many other ways that this is used for marketing or political purposes or whatever. The question I'm sitting with is how to tie this to the overall organization and the governance and strategy work going forward. And perhaps one wouldn't need to take all of this in one decision. One might be able to develop aspects of this as a tool for Emerge as it is right now, and then explore the decision possibilities for going forward. But we have already, as you might know, taken a decision within Perspectiva that we want to broaden the influence group, the ownership of Perspectiva. And it might be, sorry, of Emerge. It might perhaps be a too quick step to go to a DAO immediately. It might be that we take a step with 5, 6, 7 organizations in this direction first, and then use the wisdom within this group to guide for the next step. Or we could take this step immediately. I don't know. What do you say, Jonathan?
Right. So I'm sitting with a lot of sort of pulsations, let's say, because it's very exciting. See, my reading of it is that this is quite different from a DAO. That actually you've got something that is, well, to back up slightly, Emerge is not an organization at the moment. It's a kind of brand and project that's kind of free floating and has various assets, not least its name and its people. But it doesn't really have an organizational form, and we are very much searching for that. But what you're describing with it now is a kind of post-organization organism that makes sense of the best intelligence and technology we have to maximize the resources we have available to solve the problems we seek to solve. So I see the vision of it, and when you place it together, those 5 elements, sorry to take time to get my head around that, but you know, we're speaking about emergence, right? The combination of sociograph, trust, DAO, commons, and cooperative platform. There is an emergent property from that, right? Which or properties, which I can already kind of feel as being the sort of entelechy of Emerge, that this is what it's meant to become. So in a sense, I'm extremely excited. I have some fairly major reservations about methodology, but that's partly because I don't know it yet. You know, I'm nervous about connectivity for connectivity's sake. It was the worst of Facebook that they thought Connect was some kind of spiritual rallying cry rather than some sort of data harvesting device. So I'm a little bit nervous about what exactly the nature of the asset is. I do hear you that it has been thought through, and I trust, based on what I've heard, I have no reason to doubt that there's a solid basis to that. But I just don't feel that part of it yet. But if you really can create mechanisms for trust that work socially and globally, and you really can create a social map that is well bounded by a filter that we have to design that makes sense of what Emerge is and what it isn't, so that we can clarify what does it mean to be in and out of this thing. And you can create a platform that allows for the trading required. And you do have a governance structure that works transnationally or multinationally. And it speaks to commons problems and has commons principles, then you've got a winner. Then it's absolutely what we want, right? The only issue for me is, given where we are, is sequencing now, because it's my experience with Emerge, and it's quite a deep experience, you know, based on 4 or 5 years of thinking this through and being at the meetings and meeting all the people, is that it invites a lot of projective identification. It invites a great deal of, I want to be part of that because it sounds cool. And we need discernment, and we need the filter that we offer to be a really robust filter, while also being kind of porous and open for surprises and unexpected network events. So the design for emergence conundrum is an exacting and exciting challenge that we're currently doing our bit to move on to. I mean, in our ideal world, our next step would be to share with our potential partners, this is what we see of being the core of Emerge, these are its assets, this is what we want to do next. And then together with that group, we say the agenda for this collective of 4 or 5 different organizations and some individuals is to create a NAO that is worthy of this organism. But I confess to also being slightly out of my depth. You know, I can make it sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I'm not sure I really do as well. So mixture of feelings, mostly excitement, some trepidation, and some question marks on the timing.
That all sounds appropriate. Ivo?
Yeah, sure. Like a few things building on what Jonathan said, also still not fully understanding it. Like I said, many of the elements here that have been talked about, we have looked at individually and seeing where Emerge could kind of in some way come to embody that. You know, this was partially also in response to the requests of the people in the Emerge field. Often following certain gatherings, right? Also like people living through the pandemic when there was more a need for individual support and support amongst the members. So, you know, taking that in, it's always been a bit of a moving target, as Jonathan said, also like tons of projected identification. And in my own thinking, up to maybe even Austin, I'd say, was always about like, okay, how can this emerge? And the term I used was, how can it be as an interstitial kind of organization? And, you know, taken to its extreme, like Emerge is not about Emerge, but how can it actually help to lift all boats for the various actors, organizations that are individually looking at certain aspects that together comprise the meta crisis, and be of service there. So also in my thinking has been in the past like Emerge more as a service DAO. You know, this is one of these terms that gets thrown around here and there that seems to be coming of age. Now also as I see some DAO to DAO tools being developed by certain actors in the space again. So yeah, to me it also feels timing is right. And just to finish up, I mean, iteration, things happening in lockstep with wherever we are at in the process of kind of distributing the responsibility, ownership, decision making for Emerge. I think that is very important. So yeah, I would love to see like what these next steps could be. And to me, that definitely, you know, feels like, okay, answering the question, who are we? What are we actually working on? What are we doing? And what are we engaging with, talking about? And making that visible to me already makes like a huge, would make a huge difference. Emerge as a sensor network of what is emerging, you know, intended also as the website was, the media, etc. So if we can, you know, formulate some answers to that, I think already we can, you know, start to move in that direction and becoming more inviting. Yeah, finally, the trust part, I think, you know, using the model that we use for Austin, where a handful of people each invite like 10 people, I think that actually has worked out really, really well. First, I was a bit skeptical of that, as I was much more like, okay, it should be completely bottom-up, decentralized, grassroots, but I've kind of backtracked from that. So to me, that feels like, yeah, like the right way to go here. So I'll just leave it at that and pass it over to Nathan. He's got some big questions that I understand.
Yeah, and I would also be interested in hearing Nathan's take on what we've just heard. I respect a lot your views in this area.
Yeah, I don't know if I have I think I have a slow take and some slow questions because this conversation has moved really fast for me, and one way that it's moved really quickly is that we've been having a conversation in very abstract terms. And I'm interested in the social relations that are here right now. And because this is sort of a practice that we're in as a part of the Emerge network. These small groups meet around a special topic. And that precipitates kind of trust from forming and reforming and deepening the network that's already been established. And so I guess I'm wondering what the differences are between what Emerge is in practice in our actual social relations, and how that is related to what is being presented here as an opportunity enabled by technology. I guess I think unlike Eva, I would be interested in why he made a shift in the way that I heard you, Eva, if I got that right. Is that there was sort of a new top-down opportunity that you were previously perceiving as something bottom-up, and I guess that's been at least my part to play in the Emerge gatherings, has been to do ethnography and autoethnography on my experience. I think speaking about that in what I identified in this last conference in particular was the relationship between the breakout groups that happened before the conference, during the conference, and the plenum sessions that we participated in. So those forms of social organizing are in practice what we are actually doing as a network. And so I think starting on the basis of how we do this thing called Emerge gatherings is where I think a organization or organizational formulas or protocols would be the starting point that I would adapt from. So it's not moving from the social network and these proximal relations out down into formalizing new mechanisms of decision-making. Instead, it's taking the basis of decision-making, relationship forming, trust forming that have a history to them, and bringing those forward at greater breadths of embrace. I've had a hard time knowing what my role is in this conversation. I'm not sure if I'm being pitched something. I'm not sure if this is I'm being invited to collaborate. I'm not sure if I'm being invited to give feedback on a project. So these are all really important identifiers for me, because they actually relate to things like status and reputation, hierarchy. They relate to decision making. They relate to collaborative intelligence, problem solving. So these are qualities of collective intelligence that I think are important to establish. And so, yeah, I guess I'm suggesting that we create more of a dialectic in our own thought process about what's happening here and what's being proposed in the abstract through these technological enablements.
June, you had your hand up.
Okay, well, just a piece that I think might answer some of what's been coming up about, how is this going to move forward, is the piece about self-organizing. And one thing that I've seen about emergent networks is that they start with identifying interests of people, as you've already done some of, and begin to convene those, often in sets of somewhat related experiments or whatever, and having those be places where, as Nathan's talking about, that's where you can really build the trust. The real robust trust is when you're working together with people, on a small project. And so I think the more you can have opportunities for, pilots where we're experimenting with things, doing small things, maybe initially, but when those experiments are engaged with each other so that they're really learning, making breakthroughs by that periodic engagement, that then you can begin to see what the network, what the possibilities are, what directions it might go. And in fact, I see the NAO as a whole set of NAOs that are loosely related, each focusing on particular areas, systems or whatever. So, I think that for me, the way to start is to help some of those kinds of kind of clustering happen, and maybe in certain focal areas that give us some more traction. So, sets of groups that are working on something together. Now, the other piece that's missing is the piece that is about, what we've called facilitation or network weaving in the past, but is really about, I'm calling transformation catalysts. So these are people who are really helping things happen. And so having pools of people that understand like how to help people find each other and help make something happen. I mean, we're really not all that great at collaborating with each other. And there's just so much to learn, about that and how to do sense making and how to do deep reflection. So, anyway, those are some of the pieces that I'd like to see, I think would make this, Jonathan, more real. Like those two pieces, the self-organizing piece, and this facilitation piece.
So I want to jump in because I want to respect people's time. We said that we were going to stop 5 minutes ago, and I know that people have to go. My sense of it is there's a lot of juice in the conversation. There's a lot more to discuss and play with. I think a summary comment for me would be, Charles said this earlier, although Brad has presented a vision, or Brad and team have presented a vision of what this could be, it's a work in process. And I think the invitation here is to help shape it in dialogue with each other so that it, whatever it is, can become a part of or a manifestation of Emerge's next iteration. I think that's the invitation. So it seems to me that we ought to huddle, step back, reflect, go back, look at the deck if that's helpful, and then we'll organize. I would suggest that we organize another follow-up meeting just to see what other questions we have, what parts that we didn't understand and we need to understand. But think of this as a place to be in dialogue or to be in conversation about what this might look like, rather than to view it as something that's already baked and already done. There's a structure out there. That's not the case. There are elements of it that are in place, but there's a lot of shaping that needs to be done. And the invitation is to do it together, because we think that Emerge represents something that is it would be a missed opportunity if we don't use the attractor that's been created to help move this into the next phase.
Yeah, and if I could just take a minute to wrap up as well. I mean, I think one of the key points I wanted to make is what June mentioned. This concept is very fractal. I mean, the potential for this approach is way beyond just Emerge. I mean, and there's a lot of, how does Emerge relate to the regenerative movement, for instance? Is it entirely contained? Is it the same thing? Is it, so I don't see this as, putting all the burden on Emerge to kind of shape the whole thing, from the get-go. I see it more as kind of like maybe a project of Emerge to establish a pattern. And that pattern could be something that needs to change after the first iteration or whatever, but more so thinking of it more as a project to kind of go up a level in utilizing these technologies as efficiently and as innovatively as we can. But yeah, Rick, I think we'll definitely kind of try and distill and harvest this conversation, but I agree it would be good to have another.
Could I just also have a 30-second wrap-up comment? I think definitely we are moving in the right direction. And I definitely think that within this group, and just looking at the people that gathered in Austin, I was surprised of the level of competence in these fields that are necessary for this, both in the technology field. We had so many people who were already working on projects in this sector, but also from the network and movement building expertise. So I certainly think that we within our close network can put together a group that can create something that is really the next iteration for whatever is necessary right now in the world, and that can have a very strong positive contribution to the next emergence. So I'm super positive. And I should finish by saying thank you for your efforts and the work that you have put in, and all of the thinking, and also on the driving, that you are driving this forward. Thank you.
Great.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, Thomas. Jonathan, anybody else who wants to chime in? I'm here until the last
I
man
just had
standing.
like a 20-second comment. Thank you, everyone, just for taking time and paying attention. In terms of the tech, Brad, I don't know if you fully agree with this, but I don't see this as largely tech or high tech, if you will. It's I mean, it's brilliant tech and brilliant concept, but it's more about human or social tech. So I just wanted to add that, as you know, it's like really about people and that dirty hands in the soil of governance. So this is a heavy lifting we have to do, but there you go. Thanks.
Thanks, Charles. Jonathan.
Yeah, so I think Nathan's observations were really pertinent, but I don't think there's a huge, at least from my point of view, I'm not uncomfortable with the ambiguity. I think it's sort of very much inherent to this kind of conversation. Is there a kind of pitching going on? I think the way I see it, quite candidly, is that you've discovered something that is a kind of template for the organizations of the future. Even the word organization is a bit misleading there. It's a very deep source code idea for renewal and renaissance that goes way beyond any single manifestation. You're trying to link in the necessary features that current organizations have of governance, of social connection, of resource allocation, and so forth, but you're seeing it in a way that makes sense of 21st century technology, and you think you're on the edge of that curve, and you've done enough of the preliminary research to begin to demonstrate how it works. And so it is a kind of product or service that's in its beta phase, and you are sort of saying, you look like you have a lot of network and human assets. This is a great collaboration because you need a kind of form and we need the sort of social content and the mission, and together that could be great. So I sort of see that as a fairly transparent agenda. Obviously there are some hidden details in there and various questions, but I agree that what's being proposed here, even the word now, I'm not even sure is right. I don't know if it's too late to change that, but I feel as though it's very misleading, because I think this is so different from what we hear about in DAOs. This is something much richer and deeper and more expansive, as I see it, because you're really looking at the social network having being the primary asset and the source of regeneration and renewal, and you're building things around that, and out of that falls commons principles and governance ideas and so forth. So I like the attractor. I think it's like the institutional basis for the third attractor, you might call it, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
In that level, I'm completely with you. I think Thomas and I would need to speak more in detail, and Ivo as well, at various, what that means, what this might mean in practice. I'm nervous about locking in to a sort of mechanism that has its own dynamics that we don't properly understand, because Emerge, although it has many great things about it, it remains inherently somewhat underdefined and ambiguous. And I think if you start with Tomas and Daniel, two superstars in the network, that won't give you the same thing that you'll get from other people who are joining the network. And then the story will maybe become a bit different. So I'm keen to talk again. I see promise, a scope for experimentation. I think the form of it, the extent to which it's a kind of wholehearted all-in partnership, or the extent to which it's a trial in which we both put one foot in the water, I don't know yet. I think we have to wait and see. But I'm definitely interested, because I can see in the basic contours of it something more exciting than I've seen in anything I've heard about DAOs. It's a very different organism, I think. So
Thanks, Jonathan. That was my response as well when I saw it. I had a very negative relationship to DAOs. I felt like they were being oversold. But as I started to see the potential for enriching the concept and then building it out in the way that we've been talking about it, I started to get come to the place where you are, where I think there's a lot of potential, and it will take some effort and collaboration to get it to where it needs to be. Any other final 30-second comments before we? So I think what we'll do after this.
I can just quickly about the terminology, and it's kind of like NFTs or crypto at large or Web3. There's like a lot of vagueness in mythology, and plenty of bad actors and trends, you know, to kind of crap up the name and the space. DAOs is not one thing, so I just want to say that. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Great
Yeah,
conversation. Appreciate that everybody could show up. And we'll some set of us will huddle and make sense of what we got to and propose the next session and create an outline like we did this time. So,
and I'm going to be at DWeb camp for the next 3 days, so there's going to be a lot of new information coming from that as well, I'm sure. So yeah, next week hopefully we can talk again.
Excellent.
okay, great.
Thanks everybody.
Bye everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.